Master craftsman Mason Young has known life as a geophysicist, designer and home builder, fine furniture maker, and self-taught sculptor. We went on the local scene to Mason's Manomet studio.
Started out as a kid, just always messing around with knives and carving stuff, whittling basically. And I've always worked with my hands. And then through education, I didn't do a lot of studying of art, but I learned how to teach myself. In about the late 60s, I was working as a geophysicist, and it was a time of draft deferments and things like that. And that job was no longer eligible, so I became a teacher for a couple of years. And at that time, I really got interested in art and sculpture, particularly because of the hands making stuff. I was in an apartment in Philadelphia. I built all my own furniture, but I felt like making something that was just to sit on or lie on or eat off of wasn't quite what I wanted to do, so I started doing sculpture. I started out doing metal sculpture because I already knew how to weld, and metal was actually easier to get than wood. And so I started doing assemblages of metal, some of which are scattered around the yard here. And then in about 1970, I moved up to Plymouth and started learning how to carve wood to relieve the frustrations of teaching inner city schools. Spending a half an hour beating on a block of wood was amazingly relaxing. And the results I liked, so I decided to take it up full time. I do a lot of drawing, which is a process that allows me to get an idea clear in my own head. I don't think of my drawings as drawings, but as a process to get an image that I then can transfer from my mind to a block of wood. So generally I'll have an idea that I've done with a drawing, and then I'll look for a piece of wood that might have that idea in it, and I'll start working it, the wood. Most of the wood I get is stuff that I've either gotten myself or, well, one good example is I have a walnut piece upstairs that I just recently did that came from a tree that I got a call from some friends down in Stony Creek, Connecticut, and they were having a big walnut tree taken out of their yard. So Ellen called me up and said, "This guy's taking this tree down. Do you want some of the wood?" So I'd love to have it. So I talked to the tree guy and told him more or less what I would like him to leave me. And anyway, and then I've got a friend here in Manomet who's another guy, tree guy, and if he sees a nice, he's got a big block of cherry or a cherry burl or something, he'll bring it by and drop it off. The woods that I love to work with butternut, which is a sort of a white walnut, and walnut I like. I do work in cherry a lot, and basswood, mahogany when I can find a nice piece of mahogany. And at some point, generally, the wood is telling me things that are either possible or not possible compared to the idea. So there becomes this evolution of managing the wood direction and my own ideas direction. And when I talked about relationships, this is the development of the relationship between me and the wood that ends up being the sculpture. So there's a lot of relationships, as I said earlier, there's a lot of relationships involved. And being mindful of that is, at some point, I will generally pause because the wood and I are not on the same level. And so that has to become resolved before I can continue, because you can't force it. And generally, there's some pieces over here that have been sitting there for a long time because I've either gotten involved in something else or they just never reached the point where I could figure out what should happen. Usually it's just the really simple thing about, am I going the right way with the grain? Is it going to hold the gouge properly. Not so much when you're roughing something out on a bandsaw, because that cut doesn't matter which way you're cutting. But if you're going the wrong with the grain, the gouge will bite in and you'll take a big chip out. So you always got to be aware of how the grain is going to change and when you got to turn the piece around and go the other way. So a lot of it's just mechanical stuff at that stage. When it gets down to sanding, I will often put on some music and hopefully not drown it out. If I'm making a lot of dust, I have to run dust collection and all that stuff. But just for hand sanding, you can just sit there and listen to music and use one hand to tell where you're getting and the other hand to sand. You talk about sanding takes a long time and it's tedious. You go one grit, you keep changing grits, and then you end up having to go back because you didn't do it quite right. So it's kind of boring, but it's the only way to get there. And so in that sense, it's pleasurable. The next step is, I usually use an oil finish, so applying that. It's not always the case, but sometimes when I'm doing the oil and the sheen starts to change things, I may have to go back and do some minor changes. But generally, it's just a question of, when I get to that point, I'm satisfied and it's ready to go. I think about the similarities between science and art in that nothing is fixed. You're not following rules, you're exploring, trying to make something concrete out of an amorphous body of knowledge. And the other interest that I've always had is in mythology more as a science than as a bunch of tales. And so I draw a lot on some of those old themes. For instance, the relationship between two figures is, I often express with sort of a dichotomy of form, one a soft form and one a hard form, which to me would be sort of, to use the old Greek philosophical term, Apollonian Dionysian dichotomy, with the Dionysian being the more sensual feeling and the other being the rigid form. And you can see it in the sculptures where there's often rectangular pieces and curved pieces. I hope that they like it almost as much as I do. Somewhere, or I don't have a feeling that they ought to see exactly what I'm trying to do, but if they like it and want it, it's great. It's a really nice feeling to have somebody want something you've put so much effort into. And it seems, most of my sales, are through people just seeing it and picking it up and touching it and just really liking it. I'd like more people to have them, and it's not really a question of money, although I'd like to get, I'm not turning down money by any means, but I'd like them to have in more places. And it's, having spent, 50 plus years doing it, it'd be nice to share it some more. From knowing each piece of wood that I have is kind of weird. I've got a stack of wood back there that's going to last me much longer than I will live. And one of the things I do think about is, who should the wood go to? 'Cause the carvings should go to somebody who loves them, but the raw wood, it'd be nice to find somebody who would treat them the same way I do.
To see more of Mason Young's work, visit wmasonyoung.com.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe button before you go. We'll see you next time.